All right, what's up? Good morning, everybody. It is 9 o'clock in California, and it's Master Motivation. My name is Jason Flame, joined by my guest today, Mr. Nathan Carlen. Good morning, sir.
Morning.
All right. Well, hey, let's just jump right in. We're a little earlier than we would normally do the podcast, so maybe we'll get a few more questions and people logging on. I'm sure Mr. Cox and some of our guys will be jumping on and join the conversation. But to remind everybody what Master Motivation is all about, this was started back at the end of 2020. The idea came about, and going into 2021, I wanted to do something that brought a little bit more positivity to Facebook or social media in general, because as we're going through COVID and everybody kind of sitting at home and scrolling, and I don't know, there just seemed to be a lot of darkness, a little bit of negativity. So I said, hey, let's do something that'll bring some light to social media. And I know a lot of people that really make a difference in the world. They're inspiring, they're motivating, people that have had an influence on my life. And I can remember the first time that I met you. You were a young teenager at Chatsworth Karate when I first started teaching there, and I knew from the beginning that you were going to do some great things. I've watched you train for a very long time. Probably one of the most dedicated and the most talented martial artists I have ever had the fortune to train with. So, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you. It's an honor, and I appreciate those words. Your feedback has always meant a lot to me, so thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, gosh, we have so much to talk about, and only about 45 minutes to an hour to do it. Why don't I let you kind of lead in and start with just telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, maybe growing up, and anything you want to start with.
Okay. I'm the youngest of three kids. My dad was a North Dakota farm boy. My mom grew up here in LA. So I was pretty much born and raised in San Fernando Valley. Went to LAUSD. And I actually had a really good experience despite all the stuff we hear about it today. Very good there. I started martial arts when I was in the fourth grade at an after school program, and it was actually Tang Soo Do with Richard Mead. He was an instructor at Master Cox in Canoga Park, actually. And long story short, Mr. Cox was running a program at Rocky Peak Church, and I got in some trouble. And my dad put his foot down with my mom because she didn't want me to start martial arts. She said it'll just make him worse. And my dad said I needed to control my temper. And long story short, it took my mom 20 years to say, your dad had a really good idea.
Yeah, I'm always intrigued to hear that you started with Master Pak, who I believe still has a school out in the valley. Is his school still running?
As far as I know, yes. I actually started. I only met Master Pak once because it was an after school program, and
Hmm.
so it was Richard Mead. He was a Tang Soo Do and judo practitioner, actually.
Hmm. And for those of you that don't know, Master Pak was in one of my favorite movies ever, Best of the Best. He was one of the Korean fighters on that team. But and we also have a little bit of history in the fact that Master Pak ended up purchasing the original, well, the third incarnation of the original Tarzana Karate, which everybody's kind of connected in the Tang Soo Do world in this family. So tell me a little bit more about getting started with Mr. Cox and some of your favorite memories of training with him in the early beginnings.
Yeah. I still remember the first couple of classes. I mean, you know how it goes over the years. You remember certain things and some more than others. And I still remember the first time I went to meet him. My dad took me up to the church, and he's teaching this upstairs room with these hollow floors. And we go meet him. And I was not a very confident kid. I was an angry kid, but not a very confident one. And that was probably part of where the anger came from all the time. And so I'm just very shy when I meet him. He tells the story all the time, and he's not exaggerating. Just barely look him in the eye. But he says we were welcome to sit there and watch. And so we sat by the side, and I proceeded to watch Mr. Cox, teaching hip throws, and people hitting the ground. It sounded like thunder going off in that room. And I was hooked. I was like, Dad, I want to do this. And so we come back a couple days later, first class, and I spent most of the class that day with Jeremiah Reese, who, a lot of fun. And I had a little bit of a background knowing the, basic blocks and punches from before. And so Mr. Cox, I was one of the first students back then. You had to wait to get your white belt. And I was the first one he ever gave it to, the first class. That was something that I look back on back then. I didn't understand that back then, and now I go, wow, and it was pretty humbling. And then my second class was foot sweeping, and that was actually Dave Cox, Mr. Cox's brother, taught that class on a Saturday morning. And I had a friend I was in junior high with Jason Myers, and he was a red belt at the time, and he just proceeded to whoop my butt up and down the mat with foot sweeping. And Dave trying to teach it to me, and I was a slow learner, so to speak. I shouldn't say that. I don't like it when people say slow learner. To me, that just means you haven't found the way to learn for you yet. Um, but then it just kept going from there. And then my third class was sparring, and that was my first introduction to Mr. Knight. Mr. Cox lines us up. I'm facing John Weirman, and he pulls it, round kicked my head, and I kicked him as hard as I could in the groin. And I did it to him twice, and Mr. Knight pulls me off to the side. And just, the way things were back then, it was different. We were sitting down. He says, "Son, I still remember this so vividly because I had never met him before this moment. Son, you've got great instincts. But if you did that to me, I'd knock you out." I'm like, "Yes, sir." But then, that was the way. And then Mr. Cox is always there, always guiding, always pushing, setting a high standard for us. And it was just, "Yes, sir, let's do it." But he was always just there guiding. It was, really being a teacher, not just a coach or anything, but, not just on the mat, but off the mat, always there. And as hard as he was, it was always that compassion that ran through everything. And I think that's part of why it was so successful.
It's so funny that you bring up your first class. What hooked you, what got you excited was Mr. Cox hip throwing someone, right? And you and I and a few others have been on the receiving end of those throws. So it's come full circle. It got you excited and then not so excited anymore, right? Those falls on concrete floors and wood floors in the gyms at the tournaments were something to remember for sure.
I bet
Um, what's that?
we learned to fall right.
Oh, absolutely, 100%, 100%. So, yeah, and your story about Mr. Knight, that sounds pretty pretty par for the course. He was a pretty straightforward, no nonsense type of dude, and I could see him saying that directly to you. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Talk about the transition from getting involved in martial arts, taking your first few classes, working your way up the ranks, and then becoming a black belt, and some of the challenges that you had along the way.
Oh, well, to me, it was one of those things it's a little hard to explain because for in my head sometimes because it's just something that martial arts has always been there. Ever since that fourth grade after school program, it was not something that I really consciously, other than that day with Mr. Cox saying, "Dad, I want to do this." I've always been blessed to have great teachers, great training partners in my life, and sometimes I look back and think that was through no action of my own, just God's hand. And that's why I say I feel I'm doing what is part of His plan for me. But going back in the days, I remember getting ready for black belt. I mentioned Jeremiah Reese, his sister Shannon and I actually tested together. So we'd work out together, and I had some really good training partners back then. Bill Fisher and I were really close, always training. He was always helping me out. He was ahead of me, but he was always working with me and helping me. Um, but it was different back then. I mean, nowadays there's so much more we do, and there's so much more to it. In the black belt, I back then it was very simple. It was self defense, forms, one steps, fight. That was it. And
Hmm.
so some of those fights were just brutal. It was regular black eyes and all that stuff. Safety equipment. Then I think parents nowadays would pale at.
Yep.
um, yeah, it's just one of those things. But I look at it, it's like it was just a blink like that. It was, and I remember the moment Mr. Cox tied the belt on me, but I don't remember anything else from that day of the actual test.
Well, something to be said about testing. You said a lot more simple. It was different, obviously, and people that came, long before us would say the same thing. But I think the one thing that's probably the biggest difference is that earning a black belt then was not necessarily as ceremonious as it is now, right? I mean, now we have this big black belt presentation, we have demonstrations. It's just a bigger, you know. Attention thing. Before you test, nobody would really watch black belt testing, and then in in the Tarzana days, they'd go to the back room and decide if you passed or failed, and then they'd come out and give you the news, and then you'd go home, and literally after you did this long ass test, you still wouldn't even get your belt that day. You'd have to wait till like the next week after that. So yeah, it was very different, a very different time. How do you feel about that? Do you and I guess this could be for everybody, their thoughts on it or their feelings. Um, do you miss the old school way, or do you embrace the new way, or kind of somewhere in between?
I'm somewhere in between. I think both have good and bad. Unfortunately, sometimes with the way we do things nowadays, I feel like people they're building towards the presentation and not towards self betterment, as I see it. But with the old way, it was hard, and sometimes I think it was hard in a way that the people who really needed it in their life couldn't stick it out.
Hmm.
And so there's a balance there. It's more accessible nowadays to people and people who really need it, and it can improve their lives. But back then, I think there is the mindset was tougher.
Hmm.
So I'm always in between. In my own students, I still test in the old school panel testing way. But then again, I don't have to worry about overhead.
Right, right. Yeah, a little different.
I say that jokingly because that's not what I really mean about it. But it's one of those things of I have the luxury of in my own program, my students that I've gained through the college and the people who've come through Blackboard and everything, I'm not catering to children, cater in the sense of I need to, be careful of these young minds. I'm working with adults principally. In the
Right.
studios, in the way things work, we know it works. At Chatsworth, we know this works and we know we can take these children and grow them into confident, adults. I'm a perfect example of that myself.
Hmm. Yeah, I think there is something to be said too about when you joked about the no overhead and working with adults specifically and not working with kids, because let's face it. I mean, people do come to us and they want, quote, what they pay for, and so there's a very fine balance of giving them what they want and also what they need. And I 100% agree with the fact that in quote the old days. I mean, we're talking about for us the late 80s, early 90s is the old days, and I have other guests on here that they'd be talking about the 60s and 70s. But in our
Yeah.
old days, um, we did weed out people that needed
Mhm.
martial arts probably more than anybody else, and it was so sad. I mean, I was one of the worst on panels of, like, I would just fail people. Just, I don't know, if I didn't like your front stance or something. I did not think about people and their internal growth, right? Versus, like, all I cared about is if you're a good black belt, cool, we'll pass you. If you're not, like, I didn't really think about the person, and that was the young, immature, less wise, I'll say, back then. Now having kids, and you as well, you start seeing things in a totally different light. Now, before we continue going on the martial arts path, did you play any other sports or activities growing up as a kid? I know you did some wrestling, but was there anything else besides that?
I did, and truth be told, I was fairly awful. I did baseball, soccer. My parents put me those in, and I hated it. But to my parents' credit, they taught me around. No, you started this, you need to finish it. So it
Mm,
was always finish the season. And if I opened my mouth, which I did, and went back, a week later, I regretted it, but they made me finish, and so I learned that value of follow through. So I did those. I was in gymnastics for a while. I did that mainly because my sister did it, and I enjoyed it, but I didn't. I still have a vivid memory being on the rings and dislocating both shoulders.
oof.
Yeah, it's so, but it is what it is. It was good experiences overall, and all that. But I never was really a fan of team sports. I played football in high school for all of 3 weeks, and I just didn't enjoy it. And I found my uncle had wrestled, and he'd done that with me when I was a kid. And so when that opportunity came up in high school, I started wrestling. I did that through high school a little bit in college times, and I just really fell in love with that. So I mean, as far as sports, that's kind of it.
Hmm. What was it about team sports? Because we hear that often in the martial arts school that my child tried team sports and it just wasn't their thing, and so they
Mhm.
gravitate more towards wrestling or martial arts or dance or gymnastics. What was it about team sports that just didn't grab you? Do you recall or remember an experience that maybe just turned you off?
Well, there's a few things, and some of this I'm still this way today. Growing up, I was a little bit asocial. I didn't like socializing. Some was just a natural introvert, being a natural introvert. Some of it was I most of my life don't like to rely on other people, and with team sports, that was a big one. I was the one in group projects in school who was always doing most of the work.
Hmm.
Most of us can relate to that. As I've gotten older and I look at it and I watch other people, same thing, and I kind of reflect on myself, especially in the past several years. I've always been very internally motivated, and that the cheerleader off to the sidelines, more often than not, when it's directed at me, it just annoys me because it's distracting to me.
Hmm.
Um, so I always was kind of inside my own head, and being in the team sports, I think there's a lot to offer. Don't get me wrong. I think team sports have a lot to offer and a lot to teach people, but for me personally, it was just no, let me do it. And
Hmm.
so I found that sense of personal accomplishment from individual sports greater, and the sense of reward for myself that I got out of it.
Yeah. It's funny. My wife is the same way. Anytime she's ever tested or performed or done anything, when someone is cheering her on, it absolutely drives her insane. She can't. She's like, just leave me alone. I got this. I'm good. And when you have that personality where you're a self starter and you do have that internal focus and that internal drive, you learn that from your parents. Do you think that's where you got that personality trait?
Mhm. Very possibly. My grandfather, my grandparents, my parents. My grandfather had a big hand in bringing me up too. Just I came from a family of teachers, and so I think that had a lot to do with it. Getting me to do stuff on my own. And I was the youngest. I had two older sisters. One of them was 9 years older than me. One of them's 3 years older than me. So I was kind of playing on my own a lot. And kids in the neighborhood, I was always kind of the weird kid. Just
Hmm.
the way it was. So I was just in my head a lot. And I think that
you
was
briefly you, you briefly mentioned your parents and where they grew up and what they did. Talk a little bit more about your parents and some of the things that they taught you and some of the things that you're most grateful about your parents.
well, one of them, like I already mentioned, is that sense of, see it through. Another thing was definitely faith that was always present in the household. Sometimes, well, more than sometimes, I railed against that growing up, and I find that as I've gotten older, coming full circle back to it even stronger.
Hmm.
So that was a big thing. My dad he grew up in North Dakota. He didn't see indoor plumbing, the story goes, until he got to college, and he came out here because he wanted to get away from the snow. I remember growing up, he was always bringing stuff home and building stuff and making things, and it was always make do with what you have, use what you have, and that was a good thing. And do a good job, no matter what the job is. Do it to your best of your abilities. Do it well. Both my parents were like that. My grandfather was like that. Big appreciation for the outdoors from that. I remember helping my grandfather in the garden, things like that, and just spending a lot of time with him on those stuff. Um, yeah, and a lot of it just really laid that foundation of those kind of, I want to say, conservative values
Hmm.
um, for that. And really, it's funny. Like I said, it set the stage for things later in life. My mom was a teacher's aide. She did some odd job home from home type stuff at home, but mainly she was a stay at home mom, and she was taking care of us. And God bless her for the patience she had with us. My oldest sister, she, there was a lot that went on with her. The middle sister, she had Hashimoto syndrome, and so she was in the doctor's office getting blood drawn every month. And she recently, well, not recently at this point, I think time flies, had her thyroid removed. But the thing about her, she's just an amazing singer, just incredible. She turned down record deals because she wanted to work at church and she wanted to raise her family. And there was a very good chance that she was going to lose her voice from that. But just all it did was just make it stronger and just did a different tone. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's just there's so much that when I talk about family that goes through it because there's so much. struggles that was me being immature and a little wild at times and angry. But my parents, just the patience, that was the biggest thing. I would say if I had to pick one thing I got from my parents, was learning the value of patience and the ability to. It's funny. I was just talking to Vanessa about this. The ability to be bored is a superpower nowadays. You know,
Mm,
same
right.
stuff.
Instead of always being on the go,
Yeah.
go, go, go. As we were talking right before we got on, how's your day going? Oh yeah, it's I got this, and this, right? It's yeah, that could be a superpower for sure. Well, it's interesting too that you talk about your dad working with his hands and utilizing what he has, because I've always found you to be someone that like you build the shoot house and you've built a lot of things in the school, so it sounds like that kind of stuff has rubbed off on you a little bit, and I know you like being outdoors and doing stuff outdoors. Um, Talk a little bit about some of your hobbies that you do outside of martial arts outdoors.
Well, nowadays, much it's consists of taking my daughter to the park when I
Yeah.
can. But just like an example, I don't know if you remember my friend Eric. I call him my brother just because of the life is, and he is. We used to run an outdoor adventure company called Active Lifestyles. He's still doing stuff with that, where we would take people hang gliding. We
Hmm.
tried to take people skydiving. It just never worked. But we would do beach parties, go survival courses, shooting courses, things like that. So there was always that. I used to do a lot of hiking and rock climbing, things like that. It's been a number of years since I've been able to do that. Just haven't made it a priority, to be honest.
Hmm. Right.
Just the way life goes. And then, like I said, nowadays, I'm looking forward to both Vanessa and I are both looking forward to taking our daughter out to do that kind of stuff when she gets a little bit older.
Yeah. Awesome. Very cool. Let's talk about that transition from being a martial arts student into becoming an instructor. Do you remember the first time that you were asked to lead a class?
Yes. Mr. Cox opened Chatsworth Karate when I was an orange belt. And back then you couldn't help at orange belt. You could start helping to teach classes. Well, I was an orange belt, almost a blue belt, and something happened. Mr. Cox, he was on a phone call and he said, "Hey, I need you to start warm up class." I'm like, oh, "Okay." So doing the normal calisthenics stuff, and he says, "Hey, I'm going to be a minute and run class." And so here I am. I'm teaching this class. I got my black belt when I was 13, so I must have been like 12. And here
Mm.
I am, 12-year-old orange belt, teaching this class of adults. And I don't remember what I taught. I just remember going, yes, sir, and then off and running. And so ever since then, I was helping teach classes whenever I could. I spent a lot of time assisting, and that just made a huge impact on how I teach martial arts. Is just being there from the beginning when it was all Mr. Cox teaching, and then other people came along, yourself, Brian Nan, Dave Cox, Ken Knight. Being around these guys, helping on the mat all the time. So that made a huge impact. And then in 1996, shortly yeah, 1996, Mr. Cox made me head instructor for Chatsworth Karate. I still remember sitting at that. He had everybody he was helping teaching in a meeting at the time, and he said that's what he was doing. I didn't know he was doing that, and I was like,
Mm.
really? In my head, I'm going, yes, sir.
Well, that's kind of the theme that has run through the last 20 to 30 years is okay, all right, that's where we're
Yeah,
going, that's what we're doing, right? And I think that every instructor that I've talked to that's been teaching for a really long time, I always ask about the first time they taught, and it's almost always that, hey, I'm busy, can you go warm up or can you go start class, right? I mean, it's just always comes down to that. So when you started teaching class and you became the head instructor at Chatsworth, what were some good memories? Your favorite parts about teaching? What gave you the motivation to be an instructor?
there's a couple things. One, I when it first started, I did not want to work with kids at all. We still joke. The only time I've ever told Mr. Cox no was when he asked me to teach Little Dragons. Um, but seeing once I got into it and seeing these kids grow and seeing the attachment that they get and the structure and the way the discipline, even being young, dumb, and immature at 18, 19 years old, I could still sort of see that. And I was still smart enough in some ways to recognize, hey, this has really helped me, and I could see how this could help these kids too.
Hmm.
And so watching these kids and adults grow and hearing from the parents about how, hey, this is having an effect on them in a positive manner, getting a kid who learns to focus and goes from a D and F student to B's and A's. It's amazing. And getting stories from the housewife who, was able to save her own life and get out of a situation because of the things she'd done in class, seeing how it's actually helping people. And that's what I enjoyed. And I think that has to do with the foundation of faith and service that was laid by my family and
Hmm.
carried on by Mr. Cox. But that was one of the biggest things. I mean, so as far as the positive memories, just seeing all that stuff and, growing close with and being privileged to go close to these families and just some wonderful people that have always been at Chatsworth Karate.
Hmm. I think
Um,
one of the things really cool too, and I'm sure you've experienced this many times over now, is that the students that you've had a chance to teach and help, build them up, are now teaching and helping and kind of at that next level. You know,
yeah.
um, so who are some of the students that you've worked with that are now teaching that you want to give a little shout out to?
Oh, there's so many. I mean, just in at Chatsworth Karate alone, I mean, pretty much everybody who's teaching now, I had the opportunity to work with early on. Ashley Sage, Michael Cox, they're both doing phenomenal jobs at the studio. And even some people who are adults and moving on with their life. Aaron Roth, for example, he's getting ready to get married now. Um, and then, Patrick Prager, who runs his own school out in Santa Clarita, I still remember his white belt class.
Mm,
Once in a while, even over the years, you still remember certain things. But I remember him and his brother and their cousin Kevin. I remember teaching their very first class. Uh, um, and then we have and so it's just there's so many of them. I could be like talking about the students that are doing this for
right.
hours.
Right. Well, that's a hard question, and I know that when I get asked questions like that, God, I don't want to forget somebody. I don't want to not mention
Exactly.
someone's
Yeah.
name.
No,
But yeah,
oh, you mentioned me. No, there's so many. It's like who are the
yeah,
ones who I talk to and see on a regular basis.
right, right. Now, you were not someone that, at least from my memory and from my understanding, you were not someone that really loved to compete. Going to tournaments and competition was not really your thing. But it seems like getting to do other things, other systems, other styles, learning different ways in doing martial arts. Talk about that a little bit.
I did compete. It wasn't always my favorite thing. I mean, I'm not necessarily a competitive person in certain environments, but I loved the challenges of wrestling and all that kind of stuff that did. I did enjoy the competing. I went around all over with Mr. Cox, competing in different places, and I enjoyed that. But the learning and the doing and then the application, I was always looking for that in things, and I found that as I got better at the art side of stuff, I got better at the application side of that, maybe the drilling of and all that. So seeking out different systems, spent a lot of time with Shotokan and Shorin-ryu, spent a lot of time in the Filipino martial arts, in the Indonesian martial arts, with Pencak Silat and Kali. And so I always felt, Mr. Cox has always been my rock for the martial arts world and a lot of things in life, to be perfectly honest. I always knew he was there for me and he always gave me guidance. And so I'd always go back to him, hey, would it be okay with you if I tried this? Would it be okay with you if I tried this? And he was always encouraging, go try it, bring it back. And that's what happened, whether it was
Mhm.
Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, Shotokan, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that he introduced me to, Filipino martial arts. I got an introduction through at the old ATSDA conventions and found a love for that. And just yeah, so he really laid that foundation to check out other stuff, and but I was always looking for the application. A good example is the Dog Brothers with Pununguru Crafty Mark Denny. A lot of people look and go, "Oh, it's these crazy guys with swinging sticks at each other." Well, yeah, sometimes, but there's a whole side of it where we say, primal realities first, and we're looking at what's in real life situations, what's going to happen. This is part of why, with why I've over the years grown to love Krav so much, because we're looking at real life. And that, in the martial arts world, there's a lot of stuff that you can do when you're ready for it.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's really cool stuff that looks, but part of me looks at it and goes, well, when we say this takes a lifetime to master, we have to remember that a lot of these arts were developed when the average lifetime was 30 years old.
Right.
and
Right.
and so I think sometimes some of the fancier stuff that we see, it looks really cool, and God bless these people for their athleticism, their capabilities. But sometimes joking in my head, I go, somebody got bored training one day and went, "Hey, I wonder if I could do this."
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I've always been looking for that application side of stuff and trying to be more efficient at the application. And I found exploring those different arts really has lent itself to that.
Hmm. So, when we talk about Krav Maga, I remember when Mr. Cox, and he tells us a story about it a lot, that he was actually not really even a fan of Krav Maga. It was not something that he thought he was going to do. What were your thoughts when Krav Maga was introduced, and the evolution from then until now?
I had mixed thoughts when it first got introduced. I was like, other than some technical stuff, I was like, I don't see the difference at first because Mr. Cox had always trained us to be fighters, to be aggressive, and not to be aggressive people, but to be aggressive when necessary. But there were subtle shifts in the training and more of the reality, just how we changed the self-defense training. Some of the stuff that it was fun, but it wasn't practical in what we were doing. And so that really brought itself around to it. And the ability to get people a decent ability to defend themselves in such a short time frame was what was kind of revolutionary about it. But with a lot of it in the beginning, I wasn't really on board. I went through the phase training that Mr. Cox talks about all the time. I went through that as well, and I enjoyed the hard training, but sometimes I thought it was too hard. There was some stuff that happened there, and it's just like, why? But I understand why now. But I didn't really get on board with Krav. I mean, I was doing it. I was teaching a Thursday night class, in my rotation of it at the time, along with Mr. Cox and Bo Rocher, and some other guys who were there helping us program, Kevin Lewis, and then this is back when Jeremy Stafford was teaching there too. But I didn't really get on board until Danny Hazan came into the picture. He was teaching a seminar, and Mr. Cox and Bo, they say, you got to go out there. You got to go meet him. You got to spend some time with him. And I was like, all right, I really didn't want to go. But, Bo says, no, this is different, Nathan. You need to come and see that. You need to come and meet him. I'm like, all right. And so I went out there, and that just changed everything. Just his approach to it, really seeing it as a system of concepts and principles, which they had been paid lip service to, but I didn't really understand it. I mean, not anything wrong with the people where we started with Worldwide. I'm grateful to them. Darren Levine, John Whitman, Sam Sadeh, Michael Margolin, these guys who gave us our start, Kevin Lewis. But it's just, it was, and I think it was more me. I wasn't ready to accept the message yet. And that's all on me. But when Danny came around and I saw that and got to spend some time with him, it was like, okay, this is different. And I think what he said was that started that in seminar in Krav Maga. It's the first move that saves your life. Whatever happens after that doesn't matter. You can take our principles and you can have Krav Maga Taekwondo. You can have Krav Maga Aikido. It doesn't matter. It's the first move that saves your life. And that was the beginning of where it all started to click for me.
Hmm. Now, when was that? How long ago was that?
Oh my goodness. When Danny came to the picture, I want to say that was almost a decade ago.
Okay, that's what I thought. It was about 10 years ago, because it
Yeah.
was it was a few years before I even really got involved in Krav.
Yeah.
So.
I know I've got video footage in like 2014 and sooner. So
Hmm.
yeah, time frames are fuzzy at this point.
I know, right? I know you try to nail things down. And you're like, well, what year was that? I don't remember.
We don't
Uh,
have enough for me to go back through the files.
exactly. So, talk a little bit more about your Dog Brothers training too.
um, well, I started with Pononguru Crafty, Mark Denny, a Crafty Dog in 2008. I want to say actually training with him. I had met him before at the gatherings. These are the events where people get together and fight and train, and but I had been a part of the online association for quite a while, and he puts out this thing that he's starting what's called Kali Tudo class. It's basically the empty hand side of it, because one of the things in the Filipino martial arts is the weapon skills are the same as the empty hand skills, where he wanted to set out to demonstrate that because people weren't understanding that, long story short. And so he was starting this training group, and I saw that, and I was very intrigued. And so I sent him an email and said, hey, is this open to everyone? He said, well, send me a little information about yourself. And next thing you know, I'm down there. I brought some other people with me, and that was where it started. And for quite a while, as the group fluctuated and people came and went, there'd be large groups, there'd be small groups. People from Chatsworth, who I brought with me, would come out and do it. But at a lot of times it was just him and I. And so I got out there and I got a lot of private time with him. I got a lot of time with some of his top guys. Another person who was very influential was Mark Odell, Foo Dog. He runs the training out in Moreno Valley. But it was Filipino martial arts, but with a very eclectic spin on it. Crafty would draw from other stuff. He was a guru instructor under Dan Inosanto, along with under a number of other people he had trained and trained under as well. And so the Kali Tudo, that empty hand side of it is where it started, but then it turned into the stick work and the weapon work. And there's a big aspect I mentioned looking for the application side. We call it DLO, die less often, meaning some situations you can't win, but we're going to do everything we can to stack the deck in our favor. And it was that side of it that really kept me coming back. And eventually, through some influence, I started fighting in the gatherings. For those who don't know, these are full contact, nominally stick fights, but people use staff, people use aluminum knives, people do other toys, as we call it sometimes. But these are full contact fights. We're wearing a fencing helmet and basically, at the most, some lightly padded gloves and a cup and a mouthpiece. And there's a lot of technique and a lot of heart that goes into it. But so there's that, and then there's Dog Brother Martial Arts, which is separate from Dog Brothers, so people understand. Dog Brothers, this is the tribe of the people who fight and go out and step out in the gatherings and do this, and we're a very close knit group. The idea of preparing each other. Walk as a warrior for all your days. There's some shots you just don't take because it's one rule: be friends at the end of the day. Dog Brother Martial Arts is different. Yes, some people in the Dog Brothers do it, but Dog Brother Martial Arts is what Ponam Guru Crafty teaches. And I've been fortunate to see the evolution of that, be part of it. And the weapon skills and the empty hand skills very much complement, especially the attitude, what we do with Krav and American Tang Soo Do as we do it today. So it was a natural fit for me. I just was blessed to be able to be accepted by him as a student.
And now, did you search him out, or were you interested and had someone introduce you?
Well, I'd always been interested. I was a red belt at one of the American Tang Soo Do conventions, and Terry McMeekin was teaching six count with the sticks. And I was like, this is cool. And Bill Fisher and I, without sticks, just banging forearms together for probably about a half hour. We both walked away like, playing with it. And so after that, I was a young teenager and I started looking around. There was no internet really to search back then. So I was at the library and I was looking, and I happened to see some guys at the park doing it, and I'd go and watch, and I got invited to join in. And so that was how I got started with that. Something called, it was basically just a backyard training group, nothing official. And so I was always interested in and looking at other stuff. And, I had went to look at other places. The Inosanto Academy was too far to check out. The Magda Institute, it didn't work out going there. But then the internet came out, some things, God bless it, some things not. And I had Dog Brothers online. I had heard about the gatherings because another student, he had said, "Hey, why don't you come with?" I'm like, "Okay, what is this?" And I had gone and watched the gatherings because some of them were open to the public, and I had met Crafty there, and I was online and, I joined. He has a members association. If I can give a quick plug, go to dogbrothers.com, and there's tons of stuff there if people join up. And like I said, he put that training group, and I just fired off an email to him thinking, let's see what happens. What's the worst going to happen? He says no. And he said
Right.
yes. And so that was it.
And here you go. Talk
Yeah.
about your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu experience. I know you've gone in and out, and more recently, it's become a bit of a focus within the group at Chatsworth
Yeah.
and beyond. When did you start training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu?
Exactly when, I don't know. But once again, it was one of those ATSD conventions where David Myers, I believe he was a brown belt at the time, came
Yep.
out and did a presentation. The story I got was Jean-Jacques was supposed to, but for whatever reason, he couldn't make it. And so he sent Dave out, and Dave did a brief thing, and he proceeded to tap out the entire room. Everybody there he went with,
Yep.
and we had never seen anything like this. And this was before the UFC. And so Mr. Cox was like, I want that. And so I would go with him occasionally to train for lessons there with David Myers. And through David Myers, we also met John Will and Richard Trainer, who actually ran a program at Chatsworth for a while. And, Mr. Trainer really got me ready for a grappling competition in Arizona. And that was a fun thing, back in the early days before we really saw the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competition like it is now. And it was really it was different. And I was already, I loved wrestling. I loved the grappling arts. I had looked at other stuff, catch as catch can. I had done Sambo before this. And I continued to for a little bit, and I loved it. And so with BJJ, that was our introduction, was when David Myers came to that convention. And then, he would teach and do seminars. John Will, when he would ever come up from Australia, and then Richard Trainer was teaching that class at Chatsworth for a little while. And then, that kind of disappeared, and we tried to do our own program, but it was a little rudderless, if you will. And then we found Felipe Reyes, who he was a parent at the studio at the time, and he was with us for a long, long time. I got my purple belt under him. But for me, it was a struggle with, working around injuries and trying to do this. There's certain things. If I get stacked, I'm going to tap right away. My back and neck can't handle it anymore. Things like that. If I get stacked, I can't feel my feet for 3 days. So it's always been working around that. And so today I'm kind of in and out of it more than I would like to be. But it's been really awesome now that we have Sergio Machado at our school. This guy is phenomenal. Just, very real world about everything, has been there, done that with all of it. Highly, highly successful competitor, an amazing teacher. I mean, really a teacher, not a coach. And, there's a difference there. And just the things that I've watched him do for the students, for Mr. Cox, for Ashley Sage, for everybody else who's training in there, for John. It's just been amazing to watch. And I'm actually just so grateful that, this connection has happened for the studio, for everybody there, and just to see how it's transformed people. One of the things I personally get out of this, and maybe he might get upset at me for saying this, but just seeing this rekindling of this love for things in Mr. Cox that I haven't seen in a long time. This motivation come back, which has just been so cool. And watching and getting him watched and move, because I always, people nowadays don't know my hook kick and my drop turn heel sweep. I learned because he used to hit me with them, and so now to watch him doing this and watch him, the excitement, that's just, for me, to see that one of my idols has been so cool. And so,
Yeah, you've definitely seen a spark come back in Mr. Cox with his jiu-jitsu training, and he says it brings back the fighting spirit in him that kind of went dormant for a bit. And that happens in our career as a martial arts, at least for me, as a martial arts instructor. You get so busy teaching and for me running a business and doing all that stuff that, like, I know several times in my career, my training kind of went to the wayside a little bit. And when I got back into the training, I mean, when I started doing Krav, that reignited me again, because I had something to drive me, something to look forward to. Because, after having done Tang Soo Do for almost 30 years, there's only so many times you can do a form or the same kick, and it's kind of nice to get a different view. And again, you've always been someone that's always you've always searched out knowledge, right? You keep talking about the alliance conventions. Those were so valuable to us, and I don't think that people realize it now, that, like, our alliance brought in people, I mean, from all over, all different arts, and it was really eye-opening. But you took it to the next level, to where not only did you enjoy it, but you searched it out and went and took it one step further. Your quest for knowledge, it's, you come from a family of teachers. You're a professor at Pierce College, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And talk about how let's talk about going to school to be a teacher, and let's go down that, because we've talked about all the martial arts. Let's talk about the other half of your life.
Yeah. Well, some of it is by accident, how I ended up where I'm at. Some of it, purposeful, but some of it was by accident. When I was 17, 18, I wanted to go into the military. I deal with something today. It's diagnosed as essential tremors. Back then, they didn't know what it was. It's essentially, shaking. I'm exaggerating for camera's sake, but they told me I wouldn't be able to do any of the jobs I wanted to do. So I was like, okay, what am I going to do now? Well, I guess I'll go to school. And so I enrolled in Pierce College. My parents wanted me to. Education was important. But I didn't know what else to do. I was trying to figure it out. And so I graduated. I left Pierce and went to CSUN with 128 units. That's a lot. Yeah. So for anybody listening knows that I went to CSUN with 120 units. When I graduated with my bachelor's in history with the minor in psych, The counselor looked and said, "I've never seen a transcript like this. You're like 3 classes away from 4 or 5 different degrees." I'm like, "Yeah, I know." Part of that was because the counselor early on had given me all the wrong information, so I took a bunch of stuff I didn't have to take. But I look back now and I'm grateful for it, because all the time people are told, "Oh, follow your passion," and I say, no. You need to do enough things to find out what your passion is first. It's And so did that, and I mentioned Shannon Reese, who I got my black belt with her, and Elizabeth Kelly, another black belt with Chatsworth. They basically talked me into taking the martial arts class at Pierce College with a gentleman named Dean Picard. He was a philosophy professor, probably one of the most smartest, most analytical minds I've ever met, but he also happened to be the founder of the United States Karate League. And so he's teaching a class there, and it's very old style Shotokan Shorin training. And it kind of felt a little like Chatsworth as far as the hard style training. Even when we got to be close, I got rank under him, and at a certain point he wanted to retire and asked if I'd be interested in taking over the class. And I said, sure, not really knowing what path I was setting for myself at that time. And the college hired me. I was teaching that, and then it expanded to teaching other stuff, because I was also a personal trainer at the time. I was very into physical fitness, probably because I was the picked on overweight kid, growing up. And so with the martial arts and the physical fitness aspect stuff, I fell in love with all that. So I was doing that. So I started teaching conditioning classes and a couple weight training classes at the time. And our department chair, Shiloh Nelson, who still is, she was pushing me to get my master's degree. And I had already gone halfway through it at CSUN, but some stuff happened and I dropped out of the program. But she was pushing me because she wanted me to teach other stuff there. And so I finished that, and I started teaching health classes and some of the more academic, on the academic side of things. But yeah, Mr. Cox and I joke all the time. Most people who went to college as long as I did are called doctor.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of units from Pierce College. That's crazy.
Yeah,
But
it's a community
but
college. For
it kind of fits you though, right? Because again, you've always been a consummate learner and student. From my perspective, you always look for that next little, just that little bit to add to your knowledge, or add to your arsenal of in how you teach. I've seen a huge transformation over the years with your education in physical fitness, and learning body mechanics, and you talk a lot about principles and concepts versus just based on personality, right? Some people are just, they just get out on the mat and they got a lot of energy, and it's a fun class, it's a good class, but you don't know how much anybody really learned. I can say firsthand, sitting in instructor seminars, sitting in knife seminars, and just listening to you teach. I always grab like one thing that goes, man, that's a perfect way to explain it so that someone can understand it just in a different way. I always enjoy that I get it, because everybody learns differently, right? Everybody learns differently, and I could say the same thing to 100 people, and 50 people are like right on it, but the other 50 might be missing something. So you got to be a teacher almost by accident, professor at the school. What do you teach? What are you teaching now? You're still teaching the karate program as well, is that right?
Yeah, I'm still teaching. I'm teaching the kinesiology. I'm teaching right now. I'm just teaching the karate classes. With all the way things have gone and some other stuff that's happening. I was teaching health classes. I've taught body conditioning classes. Body conditioning, it's a catch-all for different things. Some of them might be focused on walk. There's one called walk, jog, run. It could be a weight training class. It could be circuit training. So that one varies. So it's stuff in that realm.
Yeah,
And then on
cool.
the
And
academic.
well, let's talk about personal life. Along the way, you've gotten married. You have a young daughter. Talk about your family now.
My wife, I met her through, she was originally actually that first semester teaching in Pierce College. She was a student, and then she found a love for the martial arts. She ended up enrolling in Chatsworth, and we just got close through mutual friends. And we've been together since 2006. We got married in 2011. And, Amazing. I mean, I am not the easiest person to live with. I will be the first one to say it. And
And she's
she's
listening right now, so
yeah, she's laughing over here. But no, I'm not saying this just to score points. But no, she's amazing. I couldn't do this without her. That's no exaggeration to say that. And our daughter, she's 2.5. She'll be 3 pretty soon, and she's just a blessing. She's rekindled so many things in me that I had either lost or forgotten. I say this jokingly, and you've probably heard me say it. You with multiple kids, I am learning the lessons that you already know. But it's just wonderful. My daughter is just such a sweet child. Maybe every parent says that, but I'm going to say it anyway.
yeah, of course. Well, and so a few minutes ago or earlier, you talked about how with martial arts, you just didn't want to teach kids, right? It just kids, especially little dragons, right? And your daughter's almost little dragon age now. How has your mindset changed on that? Are you looking forward to getting her involved in martial arts, of course, and teaching her, or do you think it's better? Because I've taught both of my kids, and I can tell you, for me, it's probably better that I had someone else teach my son, more. I trained my daughter a lot, and I think that I'm probably the one that made her quit because I had such high expectations. What are your thoughts now on having a child and now teaching those younger kids?
Well, it, uh, for me, a lot of it is I watch. I watch everything. I don't say a lot. I don't comment on things a lot, but I watch everything, and I see instructors whose kids, I've watched you teach your kids, Mr. Cox's kids, Mr. Chikawa's kids, other places, and I think it's so essential for the parent to be involved in the training.
Hmm.
But like with the little dragons, I'm not going to be her instructor. At home, she already knows how to do an elbow. She knows how to do knife and block. She knows a horse stance, a round kick, because it's a game. When doing it
Right,
with mom and daddy, it's fun.
right.
Yeah, there will become a certain. I'm sure there will be a time when I'm the one on the mat with her. I have no doubts about that. But as far as early on, I think it's important that it comes from somebody else.
Hmm.
I just to give an example, it's been an honor and a privilege for me to work with Michael Cox. Mr. Cox kind of Michael's different than his dad, and Mr. Cox handed him off to me, so to speak, to use a term. And
Hmm.
it's just it's been such a privilege to work with Michael as he's turned into such an amazing martial artist. But
Hmm.
it's that kind of thing, and so with Michael and I've had talks. Sometimes you need to hear the lessons from someone. Oh, it's dad again telling me this. Sometimes you need to hear that, and I fully anticipate there's gonna be times when my child it needs to come from somebody else sometimes.
Hmm.
So as much as I'm looking forward to being on the mat with her right now, it's games with us. So when she's ready for that, then she's gonna be on the mat with somebody, and I'm just gonna enjoy being that dad in the audience who does not coach
Hmm.
and goes, "Good job."
Right, right, and that's the best part. You've actually I've asked you on a Krav test, hey, can I sit on the sidelines and just watch my son test because I'm always the instructor. I'm always and it's so cool. I was fortunate enough to get to coach my son baseball, but it was different because baseball it wasn't what dad always does. It was what dad and Mason did. We had that thing. I think we were always going to have martial arts just because it's a part of me. It's a major part of who I am. But being able to sit back and watch is super cool, and you're 100% right. The lessons coming from someone else just adds more weight to it. And at that 3 and 4 year old age, I think making things a game, that's all part of their development at that age anyway. When things are a game, they learn more through play than anything else. So at that 3, 4, 5, I've always liked teaching little dragons. For me, maybe it was more after I had kids, but for me, the best thing about teaching a little dragons class is that I can step on the mat to teach that class and have absolutely zero expectations and just have a great time, right? Because I go into a black belt class and I'm dogging them in the first 5 minutes because they can't bend their front knee or lock out their back leg, and I have these high expectations. But little dragons, as long as they don't pee on the mat and they don't run off the mat crying, I'm like, today's a good day, you know. So it'll be fun. You'll enjoy it. You'll get to enjoy that. So we got a few minutes left, about 5 minutes left actually. Um, Talk about what is coming up in your future. What are some things that you're looking forward to? What are some current projects maybe you're working on?
Well, the silver lining of all the lockdown and all the nonsense that's going on right now is I've started turning my attention back to writing. I've always enjoyed that, and so I'm working on I have a couple of books in the back burner with everything else that I've turned my attention back to. So that's been kind of cool. Training, that's never going away. I joke sometimes I do all this stuff because I have no life. But the martial arts, just looking at that. But the biggest thing is just family right now. I'm enjoying spending time, with my wife and my daughter, and it's just, these are the silver linings of everything that's been going on. And as far as in the future, I'm looking forward to more of that. And I, I think I have another test coming up soon, and so we'll be getting ready for that. And I think you should.
Uh oh, you're cutting out on me. I lost you for a minute. Let's give him a second to get back
Cut me
on.
out there.
Oh, sorry. It cut out for like 10 seconds. I lost you on the connection. You were talking
Oh,
about
okay.
testing.
Yeah, testing coming up for Tang Soo Do again, and I think it cut out conveniently when I made the comment that maybe you should do it with me.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that a couple times. Yeah, eighth degree, huh? I have such a hard time with that. I don't know about you, but being I consider myself still at a young age, and to be at the level of black belt, to me, it just seems like another number. The only purpose for me to promote again is for my students, and meaning that I got to move up to let them go up, right? And so my brother is probably the next one right below me, and when he wants to test, I have no problem moving up. But it's just I'm happy being where I'm at. Like it just went so fast. Like, and we see these young, 18-year-olds becoming fourth degree black belts in what we call a master in our system. I'm just not a fan of the titles and Mr. Cox always makes fun of me about the stripes on the black belts, right? Um, I don't even know where it all started or where it happened. Like we don't do it anymore actually, and I don't know. I think it's just a societal thing that it's just like, oh well, these schools are doing it, and I guess that's what we're supposed to do. And then when you really start to think about that, and I know you're not like a huge rank person or like, oh, I'm a black belt in these 5 different things. It's like, dude, that just means that you know a lot of shit, and there's a lot of shit you don't know.
Yeah,
That's really
that's
all
the
it means.
key. Every time it's in front of a new teacher, it's like, wow, I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Totally. Well, hey, before we go on, let me just give a quick shout out to who we got coming up. I do have another interview this week, guys. So if you're watching now or you watch this later, Wednesday on the 2nd, I got Paul Ventimiglia, Logan X from Millennium Pro Wrestling. I got a great story about him. He's got a new movie out, Unpinned. We'll talk about that. We got Ricardo Laborio coming up on December 6th. Jason and Adam Kiefer. Then we got Rich Grogan and Ali Albarigo to close out 2021. And I got about 29 people on the list already for 2022. So we're going to keep these interviews going. I think I feel so grateful to have all these awesome, not only martial artists, but just people to interview and just kind of let you tell your story. And I think it will be cool one day for your daughter to watch this video and go, hey, that's my dad. He's, like hear this story from a different perspective.
That could be good or bad.
Well, yeah, I think it'll be good. I think she'll be proud for sure. But do me a favor and let's close out with the last 30 seconds or so. Your advice to anyone watching right now regarding, learning something new, starting a new project. You talked about using COVID to springboard you into some things that maybe you're keeping on the back burner, writing books and different stuff. But what's your advice to people right now that are sitting there going, God, I don't know what to do next? And I lost you. It's frozen. We'll come back to you. You there? There you go.
I'm
Did,
here.
did you
Okay.
hear me?
I heard garbled words when we cut out there for a
Oh,
second. What
okay.
was the question?
Yeah, so the question is the last 30 seconds, just give me or give the audience your advice on, if they've got something that they want to do right now, if they need a little kick in the ass, um, motivate them, inspire them, they want to learn something new. What do you say to them?
Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. People are living their lives afraid right now, and that's what's killing us more than anything. It's hard, but the journey's there and the rewards are there. Just have the courage, and it's okay to ask for help. If you need it, don't keep it to yourself. If you need someone to help you along that journey, or to give you in the right direction, seek out help. Seek out the people who've been there before. Ask questions, because the people who've been there before would love to bring other people along. If they're genuine. So just have courage, have faith. Don't lose those two things. If we can keep both of those, then we're going to be okay.
I love it. Cool. Thank you for that. Thanks for sharing all that. Thanks for sharing your story, being open to talk with me, and flexible with your
Thank
schedule. I know
you.
you got a class to teach a little bit later today, so super grateful to have you on the show. I really do appreciate everything that you've done for me, everything that you've taught me over the years, because I've learned so much from you and being a part of Chatsworth with Mr. Cox. But again, I said at the beginning, there's not another martial artist that I know out there that goes out and seeks as much knowledge as you do and actually puts it to work by giving it to other people. That's the thing, is that you go learn this stuff, but what you do with it is very different than what a lot of people do. Is you give it to everybody else and you share it, which I think is a sign of a good leader and a good martial artist. So thanks again, and thanks for sharing everything with me.
Thank you, Jay. It's been an honor. Thank you so much. I mean, your words mean a lot to me. They always have. You were one of my teachers growing up, so I appreciate it. It's been an honor to be here. It really has.
Perfect. Well, thanks again. Say hi to the fam, and I will catch you, I'm sure, in the next couple weeks. We got a Krav test coming up, but I'll see you before then.
Yep.
So, guys, thanks
Awesome.
for watching today, and tune in on on Thursday, the 2nd, to see Logan X. All right, guys, have a great Monday and make it a great week. Take care.